education is an industry that it's really hard to innovate because of the feedback loops that are very long, as you know, but also because you're experimenting with human lives, right? So that makes things a bit more tougher, I would say. And I think that in the last 200 years, really little things have changed in the K-12 industry in particular. So for me, what it takes to innovate is to have a lot of courage, but also to start small and fail early and fail cheap and fast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the EdVance Podcast. I'm your host, Vikas Pota. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Hernan Carranza, the Chief Innovation Officer of Intercorp Group and one of the leading voices in business and educational transformation in Latin America. Hernan holds a master's degree in digital innovation from New York University, and at Intercorp, Peru's largest conglomerate, he founded La Victoria Lab in 2013, a pioneering innovation hub where designers and entrepreneurs actively reimagine the future of services for the region's emerging class. More recently, as Chief of Strategy for Intercorp Education, Hernan led the strategic transformation of Innova Schools. Today, Innova is the largest K-12 private school network in Spanish-speaking Latin America, widely recognized globally for proving that you can deliver world-class tech-enabled high-performance education at an affordable price point. Hernan joins us today from Lima, where he lives with his wife Daniela and their daughters Bruna and Franca. Hernan, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome to the EdVance Podcast.
Thank you, Vikas, for the invitation. I'm super happy to be here.
Hernan, when I think of you, my friend, I think about someone who is fairly innovative, but also in your job title, it says innovation writ large. So I'm going to start off by asking you a question about innovation in the context of schools and universities around the world. What have you learned about what makes what gives the leader absolute success?
I guess the short answer to that question would be braveness. I think a leader has to be brave to transform an institution. I've been doing or leading innovation for 15 years-ish. And over the last 3 years, I've been deeper into education. And I can say that education is an industry that it's really hard to innovate because of the feedback loops that are very long, as you know, but also because you're experimenting with human lives, right? So that makes things a bit more tougher, I would say. And I think that in the last 200 years, really little things have changed in the K-12 industry in particular. So for me, what it takes to innovate is to have a lot of courage, but also to start small and fail early and fail cheap and fast, right? So it requires a bit of a process, but I would say above all, it requires a mindset of braveness and experimentation.
And tell me, I know that you've been traveling the world. You've gone to South Africa, you've just been to India, you've been to Brazil that I know of, just to visit friends of ours and see what they're doing. I mean, what is it that you have seen that has inspired your thinking on innovation around the world?
Yeah, I will provide a bit of context before answering that question. So I joined Innova Schools 3 years ago, and I actually just left it yesterday. It was my farewell moment, right? And my role has been, I was not in charge of the organization, but I've been, I would say like the guy who was in charge of revamping it, right? Or so like write a new script to have a new direction, bring new leadership with a more innovative mindset and braver mindset, and also to seed some strategic initiatives into fertile ground so that they can flourish, right? I was very lucky to join Innova exactly in a moment on which Intercorp, the mothership conglomerate, was encouraging all our companies to go into a 5 5-year innovation journey, right? So we do this every 5 years. And when I joined 3 years ago, it was just starting that process. So I was very lucky that the whole conglomerate, not just the education company, but all the companies was going into that journey of reimagining. But it was not just a strategic planning where you just like fine tune the Excel. This was a lot more ambitious, right? Like how do I really want to reimagine myself in the next 5 to 6 years? So we surfed that wave from the very beginning, and what we did for almost 6 months, was almost a semester, was with a new leadership that we brought on board. That was around 8 to 10 leaders that actually were in charge and are in charge of the organization now. We offered them a world tour to look out and learn from the very best in the planet, right? So answer your question, what we looked for was we looked for extremes. That's usually the way we do our looking out process. So we looked for the company that was rocking it on business. So we found an organization in Brazil that they were super mindful and rigorous and engineers of business design and business innovation within the company. So we learned from them a lot about pricing, new products, new brands, and I think we learned a lot from them to how to manage an educational business. Then we discovered another company through your organization, right? That's based in South Africa. They were doing business okay, but the learning aspect of it was outstanding. So we learned from them a lot about school culture, operations, personalized learning, and many things that we were not aware of, right? Then we traveled to Indonesia to learn about managing teachers at scale, because they had a new minister, Nadiem Makarim, who was in charge of the education of the country for the last 5 years, and we had a really good connection there. So he showed us around what Nadiem's team was doing in terms of building digital platforms for teachers, right? And so on and so forth, right? So in short, we tried to put together a list of topics we wanted to learn, right? And then which were essentially 3 things: learning, teachers, and growth. And for each of them, we looked for the best, most radical performers out there, and we literally took the whole leadership team to go and see it, right? For me, this last part is essential. You cannot outsource your strategy to interns or McKinsey or BCG, right? You really have, my approach was to enable a process for them to strategize as opposed to me strategize, right? So we co-created this strategy, and then we looked out and learned from the best performers out there in the specific learning agenda that we put together as a team.
And did you have any pushback from your leaders at all about embarking on this process? Usually when, innovation and new ideas get stuck because people believe what they're doing is so great. And Innova, as a schools group, is very successful.
I would say in general, there was little pushback at the beginning, right? Because I co-led this journey with a woman called Sandy Spiker that you also know, and she's like a world-class authority in education. So she helped us enable this process, let's say. And I was also coming from leading the innovation center of Intercorp. So the two of us were quite respected in terms of like new ideas and global networks and new possibilities. So I would say at the beginning, you could see 1 or 2 people with body language like, who are these guys? But I would say 80 or 90% of the people were super excited to embark into a new post-COVID journey of reimagining the company after almost 12 or 13 years of being launched, right? So it was actually the first moment on which we stopped for 6 months and we reimagined the possibilities all over, like from scratch again, right? So in the script writing phase, I would say very little pushback. I think the pushback came when we were already delivering on these strategic initiatives that we suggested, right? So yeah, just to give you a quick example, one of the things we pitched and we co-created together was to launch a digital platform leveraging AI for our teachers so that the teachers can we can accelerate their learning curve since they join the company, right? Because our attrition numbers are the average of the market. So we have, a very important number of teachers that are new every year. So we thought that could level the baseline very quickly and provide them tools and new mindsets in order to deliver on the Innova methodology, right? That initiative was not easy because it was not just the initiative, but was changing the operating model of the organization, right? So when we started building the thing, we started seeing some faces that were like, wait, but that's supposed to be my role, right? And we were like, yeah, but that. So I would say it was especially when you started building the stuff. When you started building the stuff is when we saw a lot of rejection from the organization because that was going to change the way on which they were doing things for a long time, right? I would say if that doesn't happen, you need to worry because then you're not innovating, right? So I think for me, it's a really good signal that people are uncomfortable with the new way of doing things, right? And yes, and we needed to put pressure into people to change the way they were doing things, and even change some people, right? Both from Innova and from the new people who were arriving, who also felt rejected, right? So I would say change the thing on which a company has been doing things on 12 years or an industry has been doing things in 200 years. It's hard. I don't think it's complicated. I think it's hard, right? Because they need to let go a way of doing things. They need to unlearn a way of doing things. And that, I think, is the hardest, right? Not for the top leadership, because they are, probably a little bit more innovative and they are aware of what's going on in the planet. But particularly for the middle managers or middle management, are the ones who I think we probably need to be a little bit more mindful on how to embark them in the journey so that they buy in since the very beginning, and it's not something that it's just like coming up from the top as a top-down mandate.
And so how did you get the buy-in?
We did a bit or a lot of by design internal marketing, right? Something we've been calling like propaganda. Like let's start sharing the benefits of these new approaches. Then we also tried very small, right? So we tried with 2 or 3 teachers. We sat on the table teachers. So we balanced the team, not just with designers and technologists, but also with teachers. So we brought on board 3 teachers that were carefully chosen because they were extremely influential, right? So they had a really strong voice in the community. So, and that was a little bit of by a competition. And then, we chose the ones that we thought those were the most influential. Not just because they will gain a lot of sponsorship, but also because they know what's possible and what's not, right? So they represent the voice of the teachers in the table. And then a lot of things that we did, for instance, we learned from Spark that personalized learning is very important. And the largest operation was a little bit hesitant to adopt such a crazy different way of teaching or learning. So what we did was we chose a smaller country, right? We operate only 5 schools in Colombia. And that leader, the CEO of Colombia, a guy called Pablo, was very eager to be, Pablo, to be used as the testing ground because he had little to lose and a lot to gain, right? So I think we didn't come up with all these ideas at first. We have been, like, hey, how can we do? And we said, hey, let's onboard the teachers. Let's experiment small. Let's do some propaganda. Let's try to use as patient zero to the small to medium operations, because probably we gravitated very quickly towards Peru because that's where we have 80% of our schools. And they were like, no, we're kind of fine as is right now, right? So it was a lot of, I would say, human-centered techniques, right? Like FOMO, shame, sense of urgency, and that kind of stuff.
But tell me though, Hernan, pre-change and post-change, has there been an increase in learning outcomes?
Well, I think it's too early to tell. We have been tracking since day 0, so we have a little bit of a movie or film of what's going on. which I think is very important because otherwise, you cannot compare with the original baseline before starting. But I think, I mean, I've been around for 3 years. The first year was understanding. The second year was like envisioning, and only the third year has been, like placing the bets into a very fertile ground. And that has just happened a year ago. So I would say, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, particularly on this industry, changes are slow, right? And we have to be patient. So I think it's too early to tell from an evidence standpoint, from an excitement standpoint, from all levels of the organization. I have the feeling that the 6 or 7 bets, the most important bets or initiatives that we are seeding, have had or are having a lot of positive adoption, right? But from an engagement standpoint, from outcome standpoint, I don't think we can say anything yet, but it looks very positive.
Tell us about your 6 or 7 bets that you've made.
One of the first things that we did was edit ourselves, right? So, and there was a lot of discussion and a lot of workshops, right? We put together a task force of around 12 people, 15 people, right? Who were literally all the people who are leading the organization, right? From the CEO of LATAM to the CEO of each country, education vice president of LATAM, education director of each country, the top leaders. And we forced them to choose no more than 3 priorities, right? And of course, you can imagine the discussion, everybody wanted to, but we narrowed it down to 3, right? And then for each of them, so I think that act of narrowing it down from 10 priorities to only 3, in my opinion, is a bit of an art, a political art. But if you don't do that, then you're just trying to please everybody, and you are not, like focusing your energy and your limited resources to where you should go. For each of these 3 priorities, which are learning, teachers, and growth, right? And again, that's very specific to Innova model. That's very specific to Peru's reality, Peru's context, and that's why we chose those 3 things. For each of them, we have thought about 2 or 3 big initiatives, right? For learning, personalized learning, I think, is the most important initiative that we are launching right now, which was highly inspired by Spark. These network schools in South Africa that they're doing a really good job. And of course, using the technology that can go to another level, right? That always is the most important bet when it comes to learning. We're also doing some other things in social emotional learning, but I would say that's the most important one. In teachers, we're doing two important things. One is the software that I just shared with you, right? This AI-driven software for teachers. It's something that's proprietary, and we're building it. Right? It's not a lot of investment, but it will be us, and it will be flexible and adaptable to our needs. We have started with lesson planning, but then we're already adding a module of teacher training, and then we'll add more modules so that we can serve our teachers as best as possible. And we're also launching sort of a movement to become a teacher magnet, right? That's a bit softer. It's not as tangible as a software tool, but I think if we do that well, we might be able to create an oasis for teachers that in Peru would be highly valuable, because the scarcity of teachers is something that is really affecting our industry here in this country.
So wait, let me just repeat what you said. So you said you want to become a teacher magnet. Is that what you said? So you're creating a community and hub for teachers.
And an amazing teacher value proposition, right? We are even naming a teacher success officer that will report directly to the CEO. So this person can articulate and evolve a value proposition that ideally it's irreversible, irresistible for teachers, right? That's what we're imagining. We have a few ideas on how to give a voice to them and how to celebrate them and recognize them and ultimately make this oasis being owned by them, right? So we want to create this, and we have observed a couple of very similar stories in different industries here in Peru that we can learn a lot from, right? And in the third vector, we call them vectors, which is growth. We're launching dynamic pricing, right? Which is something we learned from our good friends at Salta in Brazil. They really mastered this. And they have launched it, I think, 10 years ago. And they also built a proprietary software to to take this to the next level, right? So we're launching that also in our schools in Peru, which we have sort of like tropicalized into personalized scholarships, right? That allows us to charge a bit more to those parents who can afford it, and to charge a lot less, a lot more, or even like zero to those parents who cannot afford Innova, right? Because Innova is $180 per month, but there's still a lot of people who cannot afford that. And then the other thing, and the last thing that we are doing in terms of growth, is we're exploring the launching of a new format that is a lot more essential than Innova, and that we're aiming to charge one half of what we're charging today. So we're aiming to charge between $80 and $100 per month per student, and we're not designing that from Innova product right now. We're sending it from scratch, right? So what are really the 3 or 4 things that are truly essential for a good education, so that we can cover a bit more of the market, right? Because the Innova market in Peru, in particular, is kind of saturated. It's kind of done.
Academic excellence begins with a great school culture. Vision, leadership, and a positive working environment are the keys to success. It's all part of the hidden curriculum. But how can your institution prove that it passes the test? Welcome to Best School to Work, your guide and beacon for great school culture. Imagine a future where schools shine and teachers thrive. Our certification program empowers schools to create a positive culture that stands out from the rest. While detailed guidance and expert-led courses allow schools to keep improving their culture, achieving certification will put your school on the map. Best School to Work is the gold standard of school culture. Together, let's transform education. Join Best School to Work and create a brighter future for our schools, students, and educators. Start your journey today.
Does innovation always equate to the use of technology?
I don't think so. For me, technology is a way to innovate. Probably recently, there's a lot of possibilities with the advancement of technology, right? But for me, innovation is really to really understand the problem and bring different alternative solutions to solve that problem. It could be just based on creativity or understanding the user, or could be based on the latest technology as well. But for me, it's not necessarily a synonym, right? I think that to be a good innovator, you need to be somehow fluent in what the possibilities are today, but doesn't necessarily need to be always through technology.
So when you think about a leader that's running an institution, often what happens is that you work in a vacuum, or you work within your own comfort parameters. And so we ask leaders like you, actually, if someone wanted to become a high performer, what are the 3 things that they should bear in mind? And so we've asked you this up front, and you provided 3. Let me start you off. So the first one you talked about, which I'm really intrigued about, is you said be at peace with yourself. And so tell me what you mean by that. Have you had a lot of struggle as an individual?
Yeah, so I think I can answer that question both from a professional standpoint and from a personal standpoint, right? I think what you just read is more from a personal standpoint.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I think if you ask me as a professional, I would say, be a great executor, be super curious so that you're always learning from others, and be a vulnerable leader. That would be my short answer as a professional, right? I think vulnerable leaders are way more authentic and trusted by others. So that has served to me. But if you ask me as a person, yeah, I would say be in a good fashion with yourself is probably the most important thing, right? Know who you are, know what are your drivers in that moment of your life. Invest time, energy, and money on getting to know yourself as a person first. And that will not only allow you to be a better leader, but also to be a better husband and a better dad and a better brother and sister, right? So for me, that's it. number one thing is to know yourself, to understand yourself, and to know what are your pains and your needs in this particular moment of your life.
So what did you do to discover yourself?
Well, I innovate. I innovate with some techniques, of course, but I think I do a lot of self-reflection, right? So I do psychoanalysis. I've been doing that for a few years, and it feels time and money going away, but I think that's the best gift you can do to yourself, not just as a leader, I would say as a person, right? To verbally explore what you're going through, right? What are your evolving needs, right? And what are your fears and your shames and your, all the kind of stuff for me help leaders understand better their do's and don'ts, right? I also invest a lot of time with my daughters, Bruna and Franca, in the afternoons. I usually spend time with them every single afternoon because that's something I need in this moment of my life. And the years that I was working very hard, I was suffering, but I didn't know why. And then I learned through introspection and self-reflection that the reason why I was not fully myself was because I was not fully a dad. I also take time for myself to reflect. Usually in the morning times, I go surfing. I'm very lucky to live in front of the ocean here in Lima, so I can go surfing every day, which I don't do every day, but I do 3 or 4 times a week. And that's also for me a very important moment of therapy. And I just put all my negative energy into the ocean, and then I am all day long at peace, right? So again, I think every person can have different techniques, right? For me, it's like parenting, surfing, and psychoanalyzing myself. I would encourage you and your guests to explore their own techniques or innovate to find the right techniques. But I would say the goal is to be able to better understand yourself. That will give you a lot of peace, calm, and then your decisions are going to be way more accurate.
The second high performance lesson, which is, I think, very personal to you, is you've talked about making sure your significant other is doing well. Tell us, I mean, it sounds obvious, but tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, in my case, Daniela is the most important person of my life. And I have learned that for me, it is extremely important to have her on the best possible moment, right? So I create and design experiences for her and for the two of us to make her feel super special, right? And also understand in which moment of her life is she going through, so that we can support each other as much as possible, right? So I guess it would depend on each individual, right? Maybe those who are not married might be caring more about their friends or their parents, but for me, she's the most important person of my life, and then I need to invest time and energy on herself, as I do for my job or for my children, right? So I have learned the last few years in particular that if I am very, very mindful on designing spaces and designing moments and experiences that will make her feel important and will make us feel special as a couple, then as a consequence, I am a lot happier. And also my children are a lot happier because they see that example, right? I think the example is something extremely important when you are parenting or educating, right? Like that's the model that you're looking at. So I will encourage everybody to invest time and invest energy and attention into how can I improve the day-to-day relationship of the most important person in my life.
I mean, you got to help a brother out and tell me, what are the special moments you've created?
Well, I guess there are many. We have a special retreat house in the south of Lima, 1 hour south. We go there every Friday, just the two of us, and we lose all the Friday events. Every week there's something we're not attending, but we're happier there, right? So I think it's all the way from the weekly rituals like that one, right? To some other experiences that might be more transformative, right? Like just before joining Innova, we spent the whole year traveling together with our daughters all around the planet, right? So I think that's another moment on which we got hyper connected as a family and as a couple, right? So yeah, it's just creating the space and respecting it, right? Because it's really easy to put some more meetings in your agenda. That's so easy to allow to happen, right? But you just need to say, this is the moment for them, this is the moment for her, this is the moment for us, and celebrate it, right? I think life should be more a celebration than a career that you're all the time running. I think you need to be present on those moments with the, I don't know, 3 to 4 people that are the most important people in your journey, right?
Your third lesson, Hernan, you talk about passion, being passionate at work. Now, passion is something that I've seen a lot of people fake, if I'm being honest. And so when you talk about ensuring or doing the best at being passionate, how does one be passionate at work?
Yeah. So look, I have been working at this conglomerate called Intercorp for 22 years already, right? This is a massive conglomerate. We have different companies. So I think I'm very lucky to be part of the conglomerate because I can reinvent myself. And I joined the conglomerate doing travel and leisure. I was a marketing and online sales director for our travel company. Then I moved to innovation and design, right? And I set up the innovation center for conglomerate. Then I moved to education and strategy, right? And now I am moving into something else. For me in particular, there is a KPI for me, but that's me. And I'm not saying I'm not suggesting it should be done by other people, but I deeply care about adrenaline, right? So for me, that because I know myself pretty well, I do care about adrenaline, right? So I used to have like in my mind adrenaline meter. So if it feels it's going under a threshold, then I'm like, hey, you know what? I don't feel so connected to what I'm doing. So I try to look for more emotion, adrenaline, just because I love uncertainty and I love ambiguity and I love the adventure. Because I am an explorer. I'm an adventurous youth. I'm not an executor. I'm not in love with power or status or money. I'm in love with more intrinsic kind of stuff. So for me, the adrenaline meter is extremely important. I would encourage others to say, what is the most important thing for you in this period of your life? And to look for something that gives them passion. So what gives me passion is the adrenaline, right? Something I say, wow. And the same happens with surfing, right? Like I'm trying always to look for new waves and to biggest waves and to undiscovered waves. And that's what connects me, right? So yeah, the more adventure I can have in my career, the better. So I'm just trying to, again, I think like circling back to your previous question, the more you can be connected to that force that is unique to yourself, the better, right? So that's the passion I am always trying to invite the people I care to look for, right? Like who you are, what are you looking for now? How can you find that thing the more you can, right? Because life is just one and it's very short.
And tell me, you often have talked about focus. In fact, you use the phrase focus, focus, focus. Innovation requires you to actually, apart from focus, also scan and actually dabble and experiment and leave space in your mind about new ideas. And so how does this incessant focus actually help you?
I think there's nothing bad to scan and explore. That could be, let's say, 20% of your annual energy. But I think the other 80% should go into delivery of the things that matter, right? For me, the number of things that matter should be as low as possible. Ideally, no more than 3, ideally 1 or 2, right? so that then the Pareto 80-20 is really on what matters, that 80%, right? I took a class once at Intercorp a few years ago by a professor of Harvard called Francis, forgot her last name, Francis Dray, I think he is. And she had, it was like a bunch of weeks, and the main takeaway was, if you want to be really good at something, you need to have the courage to be very bad at something else, because there is a limited amount of resources, time, money, energy, whatever, attention, right? So I think I have learned that in my own life, I have chosen 3 things, which are my family, my hobby, and my job. Everything else is suffering. So that's why I don't go to parties on Friday. Right? I think in the job, in the workspace, it should be similar, right? You need to choose your 3 battles, right? And be very good at those 3 battles, and have the courage to be very bad at all the other battles, right? And for that, you need to be able to learn how to say no. Because if they invite you to a Friday party, and then to another Friday party, and then you're dropping the ball on the one thing that matters, which in this case are Fridays in front of the beach with my significant other. I think in the workspace is very similar. So that's what, for me, the number 3 is a magical number of like maximum 3 things. Otherwise, you get diluted into 4 or 5 or 6, and then you are not really prioritizing anything. You're just doing all of the above and all the laundry list and just ticking the boxes, right? Which then probably most people are doing the same. So then you're not being better at anything else, right? You're just an average, let's say. So that's a little bit of my thinking, and I think this Harvard class helped me a lot, because it emphasizes that you need to accept that you're going to be very bad with parties, in my case, right? So I've talked with my wife, we have accepted that. I might go maybe to 1 party a year, but that's the exception, not the rule.
And when you talk about, focus, in your schools, as an example, do you see the right focus?
I would say yes. Not 100% yes, but I would say yes, right? I think that of course, we're in a moment of transition. We have new leaders, right? But the leaders who have joined a couple of years ago, I can see they are very focused, right? They are essentially focused into features, expansion, because no one wants to be as big as possible, because the scale is really the game we're playing. And I think they're really focused on technology right now in order to make all these things happen, right? So I see that's happening. I would always advise to give a 10% energy for serendipity. I think that's very important, because if you're like too strategic, then you are just neglecting things that can emerge, and those could be great opportunities. But I think if you can find these 80 to 90% just delivering on what you have promised yourself, for me, it's enough, and just ensure that. But I guess the answer to your question is yes. It's never perfect, but I think we're very much in a very focused path towards the future. And I think, because that the alignment is probably the hardest thing to do when you want to focus, right? With your wife or your family in a personal life, but in the professional life with the top leadership, this napkin test, every so often, to say, hey, what are our 3 priorities now? And everybody has to write them down, ideally ranked them, and say, why are we different, right? I think that kind of trusted interactions is extremely important, because usually what happens is that people start to disalign, aligning to their own personal agenda, but not necessarily with the agenda of the organization.
One of the things I see, Hernan, when I visit schools and meet with leaders who run large organizations, whether it's school groups, whether it's chains, whether it's university groups, all of these change programs that I see, and all these under the guise of innovation, sometimes miss a very fundamental thing, which is the humanity, in what we do. And so, the question I wanted to ask you and end on is around that particular point, which is focusing on the real person in front of you. I mean, so in our case, it's not just the teacher, but actually ultimate stakeholder being the kid in the classroom. How do you innovate with that in mind? Because everything you do is going to have an impact on that young person's life chances. And so does that not stop you actually innovating? And how do you help people break through that silo? Because of the risk that associated, we may end up with, issues down the line. As you know, education is a long-term thing, like you mentioned. You'll only know in 12 years whether you've screwed up a young child or not. And so how do you get people to think about innovating in that context when it is the child in front of you that is the most important thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I want to tell you anything super new in this question. I think it's, for me, innovating with humanity, it's mostly about rituals. It's mostly about creating. It's similar to what I shared with you about my family, right? It's creating the right spaces, the right moments, the right rituals on which you make, in this case, the kid feel super special, right? We keep always thinking, what are other artifacts or moments or spaces on which we can make the kid feel super special, right? And what we do is we launch them very low resolution. We learn small, cheap, fast, and then we keep iterating towards something bigger and bigger and bigger. I think that capacity, it's very scarce, right? Like usually leaders want to go from 0 to perfection in one single iteration, and that's just not possible. So I think embracing a product mentality, of always iterating the product, in this case, the experience, for me is key, right? And I've seen that, again, I think Stacy from Spark does that really well. She has, their CEOs are more like product managers and CEOs. So they're always iterating. They're always thinking, how can we keep improving the experience? And they're just trying and testing new things so that this is always, always better. And I think a big difference between a product and a project is that a product never ends. It always improves over time, whereas a project has a due date and it's done, right? So I think a product mentality, like even for your own life, on how you design the moments with your significant another, could be very helpful for innovation in K-12 education. I would say actually it's the only way. It's the only way. There's no other way to keep always delivering something better for the end user, right?
Well, thank you for listening to this episode of the EdVance Podcast with Hernan Carranza, the Chief Innovation Officer of Intercorp. He shared many lessons, but the thing I take away that, in a world completely obsessed with tech trends and shiny objects, and, the lesson I think that mostly sticks out at me is leaders refuse to get distracted. They know their core mission, they stick to it, and they keep the main thing to be the main thing. And what Hernan has told us about today is around, innovation. True innovation isn't necessarily about doing 50 things at once. It's about the relentless execution of a few critical systems. And we heard him speak about, the 6 or 7 big bets being taken at Innova as an example. And to scale excellence affordably across dozens of campuses, you have to really ruthlessly strip away the noise and focus entirely on what actually drives student outcomes in the classroom. And the last question I asked in this interview was really about, high performance ultimately coming down to focusing deeply on the real, person or human being in front of you, the teacher and the student. And by using, in my thoughts, by using human-centered design to deeply understand their day-to-day struggles and needs, we can build environments where excellence becomes a natural outcome and not an accident. Hernan talked about, other things in this interview, but I really enjoyed his personal reflections that have powered him throughout his career. And not just in education, he spoke broadly about what he has done at working for this conglomerate in Peru called Intercorp. The first thing he talked about was be at peace with yourself, find yourself. And he talked about some of the reflective practices that he uses to achieve that, which I thought were quite powerful. And sometimes, I hear such phrases from people about, be at peace yourself. And I'd kind of tell them to, take a hike. But literally it could be taking a hike in this case. And so try every single kind of opportunity or thing to try to understand yourself better. And I think that's quite a powerful reflection for Hernan. And the second thing he talked about was make sure your significant other is doing well. I mean, that if there ever was a truism, that is it. And the anchor to so much we do as leaders, we forget to focus on the personal. And there's nothing more deeply personal than a relationship like that with a partner. And then the last thing that he talked about as his personal, lesson for high performance is be passionate at your work, for your work and for the mission and for the purpose that you represent. Tap into something deeper. And that is what drives high performance. Hernan, I really thank you for sharing such incredible insights with us on the EdVance Podcast. And I want to encourage everyone who's listening to subscribe, to share with a colleague, and follow our EdVance Podcast on whichever platform you download from. But Hernan, please know that you have our gratitude for your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vikas, for connecting interesting people that care about interesting things in education. It was a pleasure.